I had 3 seconds to turn a $60 bottle of Cabernet into a weapon before the sniper's bullet shattered Yeongho Yeo's skull. My knuckles turned white against the silver rim of the serving tray, the metal cold enough to burn my skin. The stem of the wine glass felt fragile between my fingers, like it would snap from the pressure of my own pulse. Around me, the vitrine hummed with the terrifying quiet of old money, the delicate clinking of platinum forks, the soft rustle of silk napkins, the murmur of deals worth more than my life. Outside, the New York sleet battered the invisible glass walls, blurring the city lights into streaks of gray. But in here, everything was pristine, exposed, a fishbowl. I approached table 1 like I was stepping off a cliff. Yeongho Yeo sat with the stillness of a predator waiting for the wind to change. He looked like he'd been carved from granite. Broad shoulders, salt and pepper hair styled with military precision, a charcoal suit that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. His hand gripped the edge of the mahogany table, fingers rigid, his eyes scanning the menu but seeing nothing. Surrounding him, 6 men at 3 different tables cut their steaks in perfect, eerie synchronization. They looked like wealthy patrons enjoying a Friday night. They weren't. 10 minutes ago, I realized they were a kill box. The floor of the vitrine wasn't designed for service. It was designed for surveillance. It was an architectural marvel of floating glass and suspended lights that made every guest look like a specimen in a jar. I had been circling the VIP section with a pitcher of iced water, navigating the maze of high-backed velvet chairs. When I noticed the glitch in the matrix, I froze between table 4 and the service station, the condensation on the silver pitcher soaking into my palm. Table 4, no food orders, water only. Table 6, checking the reflection in his spoon, not his watch. Table 2, right hand hovering inside his jacket. My medical school training kicked in before my waitress instincts did. I didn't see customers. I saw a sterile field being prepped for surgery. I caught the geometry of it. The man at the window was the spotter. The 2 near the kitchen were the blockers, and the empty space directly across the street. That was the trajectory. They weren't eating. They were waiting. Then I saw the signal. The man at table 6 tapped his fork twice. It was subtle, a microscopic gesture that vanished into the ambient noise of the room. But I translated it instantly. Target moving. I should have kept walking, refilled the glasses, and faded into the background like the furniture I was paid to be. Instead, I tightened my grip on the tray, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were waiting for him to stand up. If he moved his legs, he died. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Invisibility is a learned skill. You lower your chin, soften your gaze, and move with a rhythm that matches the background noise. At the vitrine, I was less than a person. I was a calorie delivery system in a black vest. But while the guests looked through me, I looked at them. It started with table 6. 2 men, charcoal suits, no ties. They had ordered the dry-aged ribeye, medium rare, 45 minutes ago. They hadn't taken a bite. The fat was congealing on the porcelain, turning waxy under the halogen lights. Men who pay $200 for a steak eat it. Men who are paid to wait let it go cold. I moved to the service station, pouring a pitcher of water just to have a reason to stand still. I let my eyes unfocus, shifting from service mode to the way I used to look at anatomy textbooks during my shifts at the ER. I broke the room down into vectors. Table 6 was the anchor. They were watching the kitchen door. Table 2, a solo diner swirling a cognac he wasn't drinking, was watching the reflection in the glass wall. And table 9, 3 men directly behind the target, were the hammer. The target was Yeongho Yeo. He sat in the center of the web, now radiating the kind of bored arrogance that gets powerful men killed. He was checking his watch, tapping a manicured finger against the tablecloth. He signaled for the check. My stomach dropped. The gesture was innocent, but in the geometry of the hit, it was a suicide note. I traced the line of sight. The vitrine was a glass box, exposed to the street on 3 sides, beautiful for dining, fatal for security. Across the avenue, the dark windows of the unfinished bank building offered a perfect, elevated vantage point. But there was a glare, a reflection from the street lamps that obscured Table 1, unless he stood up. If Yeongho stood, he would clear the interference. He would be a silhouette against the white interior light, a perfect, high-contrast target for a shooter sitting 300 yards away. Like the 6 men inside weren't there to kill him. They were there to ensure he didn't leave the kill zone until the shot was lined up. I looked at Yeongho's hand reaching for his wallet. The logic of the violence clicked into place with sickening clarity. It was an equation, and the final variable was about to be entered. I could have walked away. The smart play was to retreat to the kitchen, drop a tray of silverware to cover the noise of the gunshot, and give a statement to the police about how I saw nothing. But the medical student in me, the part that had spent years stitching up drunks and soothing feverish children, revolted. It wasn't heroism. It was an obsessive-compulsive need to correct a mistake. The pattern was wrong. The puzzle piece didn't fit. I couldn't let the equation resolve. I grabbed the tray of Pinot Noir destined for Table 4. The glasses trembled as I lifted them. I didn't think about the danger. I didn't think about the blood. I just thought about disrupting the geometry. Yeongho pushed his chair back. The men at Table 6 stiffened. The man at the window raised a napkin to his lips. I walked. Fast. I needed to be clumsy. I needed to be loud. I needed to break the world before the bullet did. The sound of the crash was shocking. A violent disruption in a room built for silence. Red wine exploded across the white tablecloth and dripped onto Yeongho Yeo's polished shoes, dark and thick like a freshly opened vein. For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant froze. The forks at Table 6 stopped midway to mouths that weren't hungry. The man at the window lowered his napkin. The air left the room, sucked out by the sudden, jagged violence of broken crystal. Yeongho didn't flinch, but his eyes snapped up to mine, cold and lethal. He looked at the stain on his trousers, then at me. "You clumsy idiot," he snarled, his voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. It was a performance. He hadn't stood up. He was still in the chair, still blocked by the glare. But now he had a reason to be furious, a reason to stay seated. I dropped to my knees instantly, grabbing a linen napkin from the service cart. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. I was in the kill zone now. If the sniper fired, he'd go through me to get to him. "I am so sorry, sir," I stammered, pitching my voice to sound terrified, breathless. "Please, let me—" I crawled under the table, ostensibly to clean the mess on his shoes. On the tablecloth draped around us like a tent, muffling the hum of the dining room but amplifying the tension between us. I was close enough to smell his cologne, sandalwood and gunpowder. Yeongho leaned down, his face inches from mine, his hand gripping the edge of the chair so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the wine. He was looking at me, waiting for the explanation. "Don't look at them," I whispered, the words barely audible over the rustle of the fabric. I kept scrubbing at the wine, my movements frantic to sell the act. Table 6, 2 men. Table 9, 3 men. The window, spotter. Yeongho's eyes narrowed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't waste time with denial. He processed the data with the speed of a machine. "The window," he breathed, his voice a low rumble in his chest. Clear line of sight to the unfinished bank building," I murmured, dipping the napkin into the spilled wine to make it look worse. "They're waiting for you to stand. The moment your head clears the glare on the glass, you're dead." He paused. A muscle in his jaw ticked. He reached into his jacket, not for a weapon but for his phone. He placed it on his knee, angling the screen away from the room. His thumb moved in a blur. A single text message. Status. Compromised. Extract. Now. He looked back at me. The anger in his eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying calm. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice barely a whisper. "When the car hits the front door, you move with me." "I can't," I whispered back. "I work here." "Not anymore," he said. "You just saved my life. You think they're going to let a witness punch out and go home?" Above us, the manager was rushing over, apologizing profusely. "Mr. Yeo, my deepest apologies. This is unacceptable." Yeongho slammed his hand on the table, making the remaining silverware jump. "Get this incompetence out of my sight," he shouted, playing his part to perfection. But under the table, his foot nudged mine, a signal, a warning. The engine of a heavy vehicle roared outside, getting closer. The glass walls of the vitrine began to vibrate. The front of the vitrine didn't just break, it exploded. A matte black SUV rammed through the main entrance, turning the architectural glass into a storm of lethal confetti. The noise was deafening, a screech of tearing metal and the high-pitched scream of shattering tempered panes that drowned out the panicked cries of the diners. Chaos erupted. Patrons dove under tables, like scrambling over one another in a desperate bid for cover. But Yeongho didn't scramble. He moved with a terrifying economy of motion. Before the first shard hit the floor, he hooked his foot under the heavy mahogany pedestal of table 1 and heaved. The table flipped onto its side with a massive thud, creating a solid barricade against the window and the sniper's line of sight. Thwack! Thwack! 2 rounds buried themselves in the wood where his chest had been a second ago. I was paralyzed, my knees soaking in the spilled wine, my brain stuck on the image of the SUV's grille. Yeongho grabbed my arm. His grip wasn't gentle. It was bruising, a vice of bone and muscle. He didn't pull me up like a damsel. He yanked me like I was a piece of luggage he refused to leave behind. "Kitchen!" he barked, the command cutting through the screaming room. "Well, now." He didn't wait for me to agree. He shoved me toward the swinging double doors, keeping his body low, using the overturned tables as a trench line. I stumbled, my heels slipping on the wine-slicked floor, but his momentum dragged me forward. We burst through the service doors, and the world shifted instantly. The cool, air-conditioned silence of the dining room vanished, replaced by a wall of heat, steam, and the aggressive clatter of a commercial kitchen. "Move!" Yeongho roared, shoving a stunned sous chef out of the way. The kitchen was a labyrinth of stainless steel and open flame. It smelled of searing fat, garlic, and unwashed floor mats. The line cooks froze, their knives hovering over cutting boards, eyes wide as a man in a ruined $2,000 suit dragged a waitress through their station. "Deep behind!" I screamed instinctively, a reflex from years of service, as we cornered past the grill station. A pan of oil flared up, the flames licking the ceiling. Yeongho didn't slow down. He navigated the chaos like he owned it, kicking a rolling cart of dirty dishes into the path behind us to block the pursuit. I dared a glance back. The double doors swung open. One of the men from table 6 stood there, a suppressed pistol raised. He fired. A stack of ceramic plates next to my head exploded into white dust. "Down!" Yeongho shoved my head down, forcing me into a crouch as we sprinted past the dish pit. The steam from the industrial washer blinded me for a second, hot and suffocating. My hand slipped on a patch of grease and I went down hard, my knee slamming into the textured tile. Yeongho didn't stop. He didn't offer a hand. He grabbed the back of my vest and hauled me up, his eyes scanning the rear exit. "If you fall again," he said, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy, "I leave you here." He kicked the back door open, and the biting winter wind hit us like a physical blow. We were out. The armored SUV didn't stop until it was wrapped around a concrete pillar beneath the Queensboro Bridge. The airbag dust hung in the air like pulverized chalk, stinging my eyes and coating the inside of my throat. Yeongho kicked his door open with a primal grunt, the hinges screaming as the metal buckled. He dragged me out onto the icy pavement, the wind whipping off the East River and cutting through my thin waitress uniform like a knife. My knees were bleeding, and the adrenaline that had carried me out of the kitchen was curdling into shock. Phone, he snapped. I'm not looking at me. He was tapping frantically on his own device, the screen glowing blue against the shadows of the underpass. I fumbled for mine, but it was gone, lost somewhere between the salad station and the back seat. Yeongho swore, a harsh, guttural sound in Korean. He held his phone up, staring at it as if it had betrayed him. I saw the screen over his shoulder. It wasn't a text message. It was a banking app. A series of red banners cascaded down the display. Biometric ID failed. Account status frozen. Security clearance revoked. He switched apps, trying to access the Safehouse network. Location offline. Location compromised. Location burning. They didn't just hit the restaurant, I whispered, the realization hitting me harder than the cold. They took the whole board. Yeongho lowered the phone slowly, and his face was unreadable, a mask of terrifying calm that covered a volcanic rage. My nephew, he said, the words tasting like ash. Hyunwoo, he didn't want a seat at the table. He wanted the chair. He looked at the burning SUV, then at the skyline across the river, the city he ruled 10 minutes ago. Now every light and every skyscraper felt like an eye looking for him. The police sirens were wailing in the distance, getting louder. We can't go to the penthouse, he said, his voice flat. The security protocols there are bio-coded to me, but if Hyunwoo has the system, he'll have overridden the friend or foe designation. The building will kill me before I reach the elevator. So where do we go? I asked, hugging my arms to my chest to stop the shivering. The police? The feds? He laughed, a dry, humorless bark. Well, the police are on Hyunwoo's payroll. The feds would put me in a hole for 20 years. No. He turned away from the river, looking toward the dark, sprawling grid of the north. He reached into his ruined suit jacket and pulled out a small, antiquated flip phone taped to the lining. It was a burner, old tech, analog. I bought a building in the Bronx 6 years ago, he said, checking the battery. Under a dead man's name. Cash only. No digital footprint, no Wi-Fi, no cameras. He looked at me, his eyes assessing my shivering frame. For the first time, he seemed to see the human cost of his survival. It's a rat hole, he said, but it has a heater and a lock that doesn't require a fingerprint. He grabbed my arm again, gentler this time, but still firm. Walk fast. If we stop moving, we freeze. If we freeze, we die. We turned our backs on the glittering skyline and started walking into the dark. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy rusted clunk that echoed in the empty room. The apartment in the Bronx was a tomb of stagnant air and dust, illuminated only by the orange glare of a streetlight filtering through grime-streaked windows. There was no furniture, just a bare mattress in the corner, and a radiator that hissed, but gave no heat. Yeongho didn't relax. He paced the perimeter, checking the window locks, his silhouette jagged and tense against the peeling wallpaper. Then he turned to me. "Take it off," he said. His voice was devoid of inflection, flat and cold. I stood by the door, hugging my arms to stop the shivering that had started in the car and hadn't stopped since. "Excuse me?" "The vest, the shirt," he commanded, stepping closer. Not the gun he had taken from the glove box was on the floor, but his eyes were weapon enough. "Hyunwoo knows where we are. That means either he tracked the car, which is impossible, or you're wearing a wire." "I am a waitress," I snapped, the exhaustion fraying my patience. "I serve wine. I don't wear wires. Take it off, Elea, or I do it for you." It wasn't a threat of assault. It was a promise of efficiency. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the cornered animal behind the granite face. He was terrified, not for himself, but of the unknown variable. Me. My hands shook as I undid the buttons of my black vest. I let it drop to the dusty floor, then the white button down. My fingers were numb, fumbling with the plastic buttons. I stripped down to my camisole, the cold air biting into my skin like teeth. "Turn around," he ordered. And I turned, exposing my back to him. I felt the heat of his hand hovering near my spine, tracing the line of my clothes, checking for the telltale bump of a transmitter. He was thorough, clinical. It was humiliating. Stripped bare in a freezing room by a man who could kill me with a single motion. Lift your hair. I pulled the pins from my bun, letting my hair fall, then lifted the mass of it off my neck. He stopped. His hand didn't touch me, but I felt his gaze fixate on my left shoulder blade. There was no wire there, just a scar, a thick raised ridge of burned tissue where a pot of boiling stock had been thrown during a kitchen dispute 3 years ago. Below it, fading yellow bruises on my ribs from double shifts and moving kegs. I wasn't the pristine doll from the vitrine. I was a map of old injuries. You didn't get that pouring wine, he said quietly. Kitchen accident, I lied, staring at the cracked plaster of the wall. Occupational hazard. No, he murmured. That's a defensive wound. You turned away from something hot. He stepped back. The clinical tension in the room broke, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. He had been looking for a traitor. He found a survivor. I heard the rustle of fabric. I braced myself for the next order, the next humiliation. Instead, a heavy weight settled over my shoulders. Warmth engulfed me. It was his suit jacket, ruined, smelling of smoke and expensive sandalwood, but thick and dry. He pulled the lapels together in front of me, his knuckles grazing my collarbone. His hands, which had been fists since we left the restaurant, were open now. Keep it on, he said, not his voice rougher than before, stripped of the command. You're freezing. He turned away, walking to the window to watch the street, giving me the only thing he had left to offer, his back and a moment of privacy. Yeongho sat on the edge of the bare mattress, his white dress shirt unbuttoned and pulled down off his left shoulder. In the harsh, flickering light of the bathroom bulb, the jagged gash across his deltoid looked angry and deep, a souvenir from the glass explosion during the escape. He held a bottle of cheap vodka in one hand and a curved suture needle in the other. His hand, usually rock steady, trembled slightly. The angle was impossible. He grunted, frustration leaking through his stoic mask as the needle slipped for the third time. Damn it, he hissed, the word a low vibration in the quiet room. I stood in the doorway, still wrapped in his oversized suit jacket. You're going to sew that crooked. Yeongho didn't look up. He kept trying to angle the needle, his jaw set in a stubborn line. Go back to the main room. Don't touch anything. If you sew it crooked, the skin pulls, I said, stepping into the small, sterile space. It scars tight, limits your range of motion. He stopped. He looked at me in the mirror, his eyes dark with pain and exhaustion. And a waitress knows about range of motion? A waitress knows that if she drops a tray, she doesn't get tips, I countered, moving closer. If you drop your arm in a fight, you get dead. I held out my hand. Expectant. Give it to me. Yeongho hesitated. Giving up the needle was giving up control. He looked at the wound, then at my hand. Slowly, reluctantly, he handed me the needle. If you faint at the sight of blood, tell me now. I didn't answer. I took the vodka bottle and wet a clean cloth I'd found under the sink. This will sting. I pressed the cloth to the wound. Hard. Yeongho hisses, his entire body going rigid. His good hand gripped the edge of the porcelain sink, knuckles turning white. He didn't pull away. Breathe, I murmured, focusing on the ragged edges of the skin. You're holding your breath. I'm fine. You're tense. Tense muscle is harder to stitch. I tossed the bloody cloth into the sink and threaded the needle. My movements were fluid, practiced, efficient. Where did you learn to do this? He asked, watching my hands. My brother, I said, keeping my eyes on the needle. He got into fights. We couldn't afford the ER. You learn fast when the alternative is infection. I pierced the skin. Yeongho flinched, a microscopic movement. "Don't move," I whispered. The echo of my words from the restaurant hung in the air. "Don't move." Yeongho looked at me, really looked at me. Not as a problem to be solved, but as a woman. He saw the stray hairs escaping my bun, the focus in my eyes, the absolute lack of fear in my hands. "You saved my life tonight," he said quietly. "I saved your shoes," I replied, tying off the first knot. "Why?" I paused. I looked up, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "Because I saw them watching you, and I know what it looks like when people think you don't matter, like you're just furniture." I touched the skin around the wound, checking the tension. My fingers were cool against his burning skin. "They looked at you like you were already dead." I didn't like it. "So you broke the glass." "I changed the pattern. Want people freeze when things break." I went back to the second stitch. Yeongho watched my hands, mesmerized. "You have good hands, Elea." "Steady hands," I corrected. "Useful for carrying drinks." "Useful for more than that." The tension spiked. It was thick, dangerous. I finished the last stitch and snipped the thread. I stepped back, wiping my hands on a towel. The distance returned, but the connection remained. "Done. Keep it dry. Don't lift anything heavy for 48 hours. "We leave in 4 hours, he said, pulling his shirt back on. "That's heavy lifting." "Then don't blame the seamstress when you pop a stitch." I turned to leave. "Elea?" I stopped in the doorway. I didn't turn around. "Thank you." I turned my head slightly. A half smile, the first one of the night. "You owe me a tip." I woke up to the sound of glass breaking. Not the shattering of a wine glass, but the dull, muffled crunch of a boot on a discarded syringe in the hallway outside. Yeongho was already moving. He was a shadow detached from the wall, his hand over my mouth before I could gasp. His eyes were wide, alert, and terrified. "They're here," he breathed, the words forming a ghost of condensation in the freezing air. The heavy footsteps paused outside our door, then the distinct metallic click of a lockpick. Yeongho pointed to the far corner of the room, where a panel in the drywall had been pulled loose to expose the old plumbing chase. It was a maintenance crawl space, narrow, filthy, and dark. We scrambled. I went first, squeezing my shoulders through the gap, scraping my back against raw insulation. Yeongho followed, now pulling the panel back into place just as the front door exploded inward. The crawl space was suffocating. It smelled of wet rot and ancient dust. We were pressed together in the pitch black, my back against the rough brick of the outer wall, his chest crushed against mine. There was no room to move, no room to breathe. Through the thin drywall, we heard the heavy tactical tread of boots. "Clear left," a voice growled. "Check the closet." Yeongho's body was a wall of heat against my shivering frame. His arm was braced above my head to keep his weight off me, but every time he breathed, his chest expanded against my breasts. I could feel the rapid, frantic beat of his heart through his shirt, a rhythm that matched my own. A flashlight beam swept across the room, slicing through the cracks in the panel like a laser, and it illuminated the side of his face. The sharp jawline, the bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple, the intense focus in his eyes. He wasn't looking at the light. He was looking at me. The adrenaline of the hunt began to curdle into something else. The fear was still there, sharp and metallic, but beneath it, the enforced intimacy of our bodies was creating a different kind of heat. I was hyper-aware of everything. The scratch of his wool coat against my bare arms, the smell of his skin, salt, blood, and sandalwood filling my lungs. One of the men outside kicked the bathroom door open. "Bathroom clear. No sign of them." "Check the vents," another voice ordered. Yeongho shifted slightly, trying to make himself smaller. His thigh slid between mine. It was an accident of geometry, a necessity of space. No, but the friction sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with survival. I gasped, a tiny, almost silent intake of air. Yeongho froze. He looked down at me, his eyes dark and unreadable in the shadows. He lowered his head slowly, his lips hovering inches from my ear. "Breathe," he whispered, so quietly I felt the word more than heard it. "I've got you." His hand moved from the wall to the back of my neck, his thumb tracing the pulse point there. It was racing. He leaned closer. His breath ghosted across my cheek, hot and uneven. The distance between us evaporated. In the dark, pressed against the cold brick, the line between hiding and holding blurred. I looked up at him. His gaze dropped to my mouth. The air between us was electric, charged with the terrifying potential of violence and desire. He leaned in. Just a fraction of an inch. My lips parted. I wasn't scared of the men with guns anymore. I was scared of this. Crash. Something heavy fell in the room next door. "Movement in 4B, the voice shouted. "Go, go." The footsteps pounded away, fading down the hall. Yeongho pulled back. The spell broke, shattered by the reality of the hunt. He closed his eyes for a second, a look of profound regret crossing his face, before the mask of the boss slammed back into place. "We have to move," he whispered, his voice rough. But he didn't let go of my neck. Not yet. The morning sun filtered through the grime of the window in gray, dusty beams that offered no warmth. We sat on the floor, the space between us filled with the smell of stale coffee and cold lo mein from a carton we'd bought at a bodega 3 blocks away. Yeongho picked at the noodles with a plastic fork, his movements stiff from the stitches. The king of the underworld, eating $3 takeout in a shirt stiff with dried blood. "I have a contact in Jersey," he said, his voice rough with lack of sleep. "He can get us to Teterboro. There's a plane waiting. We go to Macau until the heat dies down." "Macau?" I asked, watching him. "It's over, Elea. Hyunwoo has the accounts, the buildings, the men. If we stay, we're dead within the week." He dropped the fork. "I'll set you up with a new identity. Enough money to finish medical school anywhere but here." It was a generous offer. It was the smart offer. But the pattern in my head wouldn't resolve. It was itching at the back of my skull, a jagged piece of the puzzle that didn't fit the picture of a simple coup. "No," I said. Yeongho looked up, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a negotiation." "It's not a negotiation, it's a diagnosis." I pushed the takeout cartons aside, clearing a space on the scarred linoleum floor. I grabbed the salt shaker, the pepper, a packet of soy sauce, and a crushed soda can. "What are you doing?" "Mapping the room," I said, my voice gaining strength. I placed the salt shaker in the center. "This is you, table 1. I placed the pepper shaker to the left. Table 6, the shooters. I placed the soy sauce to the right. Table 9, the blockers. I know where they were sitting, Elea. I was there." "You were looking at the gun," I said, moving the pepper shaker slightly forward. "You missed the hand holding it. Look at the spacing." I pointed to the gap between table 6 and table 9. The shooters at table 6 were Russian. I heard the accent when they ordered the steak. The blockers at table 9 were Korean, your own men, turned by your nephew. "So, mercenaries work together." "Not like this," I countered. "Usually a hit team creates a perimeter, a circle. But look at the gap." I traced a line through the empty space on the floor. "They didn't box you in. They created a corridor." Yeongho frowned, leaning forward. "And table 6, I continued, tapping the pepper shaker. "They ordered a bottle of 1996 Barolo. They didn't open it. They asked for 3 glasses. There were only 2 of them," Yeongho murmured, the realization dawning in his eyes. "Exactly. They were waiting for a 3rd person, someone who was supposed to sit down after you were removed." I moved the soda can, representing the empty chair, to table 6. "Like the corridor leads right to this chair." I looked up at him. This wasn't an assassination, Yeongho. It was a handover. Hyunwoo wasn't just killing you to take the throne. He was selling your territory to the Russians. The men at table 6 weren't just shooters. They were the buyers. And Hyunwoo was coming to toast the deal with your wine over your dead body. Yeongho stared at the plastic arrangement on the floor. The defeat that had clouded his face vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. He wasn't just a man who had lost a fight anymore. He was a man who had been sold like cattle. A merger, he whispered. He's merging the syndicate with the Volkov family. If you run to Macau, I said softy, the deal goes through. The Volkovs take the ports. Your legacy is gone. Yeongho stood up. He walked to the window, none his reflection ghostly in the glass. He buttoned his ruined jacket over the bandages. We aren't going to Teterboro, he said. Where are we going? He turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw the monster the city feared. To crash a wedding. The air in the room shifted, growing heavier, colder. Yeongho stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the gray morning light. He wasn't looking at the street anymore. He was looking at a future that had narrowed down to a single point of violence. There's a ferry leaving from the Jersey terminal in 2 hours, he said, not turning around. My contact can get you on it. New ID, cash in an offshore account. Enough to disappear. Go to Europe. Finish your degree. I stared at his back. It was a generous offer. It was the smart offer. Yet it was the offer of a man trying to save the only thing he hadn't broken yet. And you? I asked. I go back to the Vitrine, he said flatly. Tonight. The merger happens at the coronation dinner. Hyunwoo will be there to sign the papers with the Volkovs. I'm going to kill them all. You're going to walk into a room full of armed men alone? I stood up, my voice rising. That's not a plan, Yeongho. That's suicide. It's justice, he countered, finally turning to face me. His eyes were hard, flinty. I built this city. I won't let a boy sell it for parts. He walked over to where I stood, stopping just inside my personal space. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of cash, the emergency fund from the safe house. He pressed it into my hand. His fingers were warm, rough against my palm. Take it, Elea. I'll go. I looked down at the money. It was enough to change my life. I could walk away. I could be safe. I could be invisible again. But the pattern in my head wouldn't let me go. I saw the room at the Vitrine, the glass walls, the angles, the blind spots. I saw Yeongho walking in alone, a bull in a china shop, getting cut to pieces before he even reached the table. And I saw myself, running, looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, waiting for a car to slow down too near, for a shadow to move wrong. No, I said. I shoved the money back against his chest. Yeongho blinked, surprised. Elea, I'm already in the game, Yeongho, I interrupted, stepping closer until I was looking up into his face. You think Hyunwoo is going to stop looking for me just because you die? I'm the loose end. I'm the waitress who saw the faces. And if you go down, they come for me next. In Europe, in Asia, it doesn't matter. I can protect you. You can't even protect yourself right now, I snapped. You're hurt, you're outnumbered, and you're emotional. You're walking into a trap because you're angry. And what do you propose? He growled, frustration leaking into his voice. I propose we win, I said, my voice steady. You know the players. I know the board. I know every inch of that restaurant. I know the blind spots in the reflection. I know which floorboards creak and which service doors don't lock. I took a breath, steeling myself. You provide the muscle. I provide the eyes. We go in together. Yeongho stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for fear, for hesitation. He found neither. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders eased, when the hardness in his eyes softened into something like respect. Partners? he said, testing the word. It sounded strange coming from him, a man who ruled alone. Partners, I confirmed. But if we survive this, I want more than cash. Name it. I want a seat at the table, not as a waitress, as an equal. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile for real. It was terrifying. It was perfect. Deal, he said. He offered his hand. Not the money, but his hand. I took it. His grip was solid, an anchor in the storm. Now, he said, turning back to the window, we need to get dressed. We didn't go back to the safe house. We went to a tailor shop in Chinatown, tucked behind a storefront selling jade amulets and dried herbs. The owner, an old man with clouded eyes, didn't ask questions. None, he just unlocked the back room. Inside, racks of suits hung like ghosts in plastic shrouds. Yeongho moved through them with a predator's grace, selecting a tuxedo that was blacker than a moonless night. The old guard will meet us at the service entrance, he said, holding the jacket up to the light. 4 men, retired enforcers, loyal to the blood oath, not the payroll. He turned to me. You need to look the part. He pulled a dress from a rack in the corner. It was emerald green silk, floor length with a slit that ran dangerously high up the thigh. It looked like money. It looked like armor. I changed behind a folding screen. The silk whispered against my skin, cool and alien compared to the scratchy polyester of my uniform. When I stepped out, Yeongho stopped buttoning his shirt. His gaze swept over me, clinical at first, on checking for flaws in the disguise, then slowing, deepening. Turn, he commanded. I turned. The dress fit perfectly, clinging to curves I usually hid under an apron. Good, he said, his voice dropping an octave. You aren't a waitress tonight. You are my wife, my partner. You belong in that room. He walked over to me, holding a diamond necklace he had pulled from a safe in the floor. Lift your hair. I lifted the heavy mass of my hair. He fastened the clasp at the nape of my neck, his fingers lingering on my skin. The cold metal of the diamonds was a shock, but his touch was fire. This, he whispered, his breath stirring the fine hairs on my neck, is the signal. If things go wrong, if I give the order, you take it off and throw it. Throw it? It's worth $500,000. It creates a distraction. People look at shiny things when they fall. I met his eyes in the mirror. And while they look, I kill them. He stepped back, turning to the mirror to adjust his own tie. His movements were stiff. The wound in his shoulder made lifting his arm difficult. He winced, a flicker of pain crossing his face. Let me, I said, stepping forward. I reached up, my hands brushing his. I tied the silk knot with the same precision I had used to stitch his skin. He watched me, his eyes dark and unreadable. You're shaking, he murmured. I'm terrified, I admitted, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. I could feel the holster underneath, the hard line of the gun against his ribs. Good, he said. Fear keeps you sharp. He caught my hand, pressing his thumb into my palm. Tonight, you are the eyes. I am the hands. I we move as one. As one, I repeated, the words feeling like a vow. He opened the door to the alleyway. The wind hit us, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. A black sedan idled at the curb, the windows tinted dark enough to hide a war. Yeongho held the door open for me. I stepped out of the shop and into the night, leaving Elea the waitress behind in a pile of discarded clothes. The vitrine was resurrected. New glass, new carpet, new silence. But the air inside tasted stale, recycled through vents that couldn't scrub the memory of violence. We walked in through the front doors, not as ghosts, but as the headline act. Yeongho wore the tuxedo like a second skin, his injured arm held stiffly at his side, concealed by the cut of the jacket. I walked a half step behind him, my hand resting lightly on his good arm. on the emerald silk whispering against the floor. The room didn't just quiet down, it died. Hyunwoo stood at the head of the long banquet table in the center of the room, a champagne flute raised halfway to his lips. He was young, handsome in a way that suggested soft hands and expensive schools. Beside him sat 3 men I recognized from the files Yeongho had shown me, the Volkov lieutenants. Hyunwoo's face drained of color. The glass in his hand tilted, spilling champagne onto his cuff. He looked like a child caught wearing his father's suit. "Uncle," he stammered, the word cracking in the silence. Yeongho didn't stop walking. He moved through the room with the inexorable momentum of a glacier. "Nephew, you started the party without me." I wasn't looking at Hyunwoo. I was scanning. Table 4, empty. Table 9, 2 men, shoulders tight. Bulges under left armpits. The bar. 1 man. Watching the reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. My eyes flicked to the mezzanine level, the sniper's perch from before. It was empty, too easy. Then I saw it, a glint of light near the kitchen service door, a tiny rhythmic flash. A laser sight taped over to dull the beam, but not enough. "Kitchen door," I whispered, barely moving my lips. 3 o'clock. Hi. Yeongho didn't nod. He just tightened his grip on my arm. Hyunwoo recovered his composure, forcing a smile that looked more like a rictus of fear. We heard reports that I was dead," Yeongho finished, stopping at the foot of the table. "You have terrible sources, Hyunwoo." The Volkov lieutenant stood up, his hand drifting toward his jacket. "This is a private event, Mr. Yeo. Perhaps we can discuss." "Sit down," Yeongho said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command spoken with the absolute certainty of violence. The man froze. I reached into my clutch. I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out a silver compact mirror. I opened it, angling the glass to catch the overhead halogen light. I found the kitchen door in the reflection. I tilted the mirror up. The beam of light hit the sniper in the eyes. He flinched, raising a hand to block the glare. "Now," I said. Yeongho moved. He didn't draw a gun. He grabbed a steak knife from the nearest place setting and drove it through the Volkov lieutenant's hand, pinning it to the table. The man screamed, a high, thin sound that shattered the tension. Chaos erupted. The men at table 9 drew their weapons. Yeongho kicked the table over, using it as a shield. "Down!" he roared. They're shoving me behind the heavy oak surface. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Glass shattered, again. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a purge. From the service entrance, the old guard poured in. 4 men in gray suits, moving with the terrifying efficiency of professionals. They didn't spray bullets, they placed them. Pop, pop, pop. The men at table 9 dropped. The man at the bar slumped over the counter, his drink untouched. Yeongho stood up from behind the table, a pistol now in his hand, drawn from the holster of the fallen lieutenant. He walked toward Hyunwoo, who was cowering on the floor, weeping. The room fell silent again, save for the whimpering of the boy king. Yeongho looked at me. I was still holding the compact, my hands steady. I nodded. Clear. Yeongho turned back to his nephew. He raised the gun, and the silence that followed the gunfire was heavier than the noise. It pressed down on the room, thick with the smell of sulfur and spilled champagne. The Volkov lieutenants lay still among the ruins of the dinner service, their ambitions bleeding out onto the new carpet. Hyunwoo was the only one left moving. He knelt amidst the shards of the centerpieces, his hands raised, weeping. He didn't look like a usurper anymore. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was terrified of the punishment. "Uncle," he sobbed, his voice cracking. "Please, it was business, just business." Yeongho stood over him, the pistol in his hand pointed at the floor. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Business is selling a product, Hyunwoo. You sold me." "I can fix it. I can call them back. We can renegotiate." Yeongho shook his head slowly. You can't negotiate with gravity. Once you jump, you fall." The flashing lights of police cruisers washed the room in rhythmic bursts of blue and red. The front doors opened, but no SWAT team stormed in. Instead, a heavy-set captain in a trench coat walked in, stepping casually over the debris. He looked at the bodies, then at Yeongho, then at the trembling nephew. "Rough night, Mr. Yeo," the captain said, taking out a notebook. "Home invasion?" "Something like that," Yeongho replied, holstering the weapon. He gestured to Hyunwoo. "This one is the ringleader. He has a lot to confess before he goes away." Hyunwoo screamed as two uniformed officers hauled him up. He kicked and pleaded, invoking blood, invoking family. Yeongho didn't blink. He watched his nephew be dragged out the same glass doors he had planned to walk through as a king. When the doors closed, Yeongho turned to me. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold ache in my bones. I was standing by the overturned table, the silver compact mirror still clutched in my hand. I should have been shaking. I should have been hysterical. But I wasn't. I looked at the room. I saw the angles of the bodies. I saw the trajectory of the bullets. I saw the cleanup crew waiting in the wings. It wasn't a tragedy. It was just another pattern resolving itself. Yeongho walked over to me. He reached out and gently pried the mirror from my fingers. He closed it with a soft snap and slipped it into his pocket. "You didn't look away," he said quietly. "I told you," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm not a waitress. I don't just carry the plates. I see the kitchen." He studied my face, looking for the cracks, for the trauma that breaks people who aren't built for this world. He found only the same steel that held his own spine together. "Go home, Elea," he said, but the dismissal was soft. "Get some sleep. The car is waiting." "And you?" "I have to clean the floor." 30 days later, the vitrine reopened. The glass walls had been replaced, thicker this time, bulletproof and polarized against the glare. The carpet was new, a deep, forgiving charcoal. The hum of conversation was back, the low frequency of wealth and power vibrating through the air. I walked through the front doors. I wasn't wearing a uniform. I wasn't wearing the emerald silk disguise. I was wearing a tailored black suit, sharp enough to cut, now with a silk blouse the color of arterial blood. The host station was manned by a new hire. He stepped forward to intercept me. "Madam, do you have a reservation?" "She's with me." The voice cut through the room. Yeongho sat at table 1. He was alone, but the chair opposite him was pulled out. The host bowed and stepped back. I walked across the floor, feeling the eyes of the room on me. They didn't see a server anymore. They saw the woman who walked through the fire and came out holding the match. I sat down. Yeongho looked tired, but the tension in his shoulders was gone. The sling was off, though he moved his left arm with deliberate care. A bottle of 1996 Barolo sat between us, opened, breathing. He didn't speak. He reached for the bottle. I watched his hand. The scar on his wrist from the glass was still pink, on a jagged line that matched the one on my back. He lifted the bottle. He poured the wine into my glass. The dark liquid swirled, rising to the rim. His hand was rock steady. Not a drop hit the tablecloth. He set the bottle down and raised his own glass. "To the pattern," he said. I raised mine, the crystal catching the light. "To the disruption." We drank. The wine tasted like iron and victory. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that the kingdom had a new queen.